Hi, everyone, and welcome to my show called We Were Lied to About 9/11. I am your host, John Gold, and this show is part of the Soapbox People's Network. This week, we will be discussing in detail who Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed and Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh are and their relationship to 9/11. This is a topic we could spend hours and hours on, but unfortunately, we were limited to 2 hours today.
Hi, this is John, and I'm here with John Newman. John, how are you doing today?
Fine. Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing great. I'm going to have brunch soon with my father for Father's Day. I'm going to get to see my new niece, and I love seeing my new niece. I'm totally in love with her. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read your bio for everyone. And by the way, this was a very impressive bio. I mean, all of them are. All of my guests have been, but this was just, I was very impressed by this. Dr. John M. Newman, Jr., Major, U.S. Army, retired, was born on the 20th of December, 1950 in Dayton, Ohio. Dr. Newman earned a B.A. in Chinese Studies at George Washington University in 1973, an M.A. in East Asian Studies, George Washington University in 1976, and a Ph.D. in Modern Far Eastern History, again at George Washington University in 1992. He served in U.S. Army Intelligence from 1974 to 1994, became the assistant to the Director, National Security Agency, 1988 to 1990, and was a U.S. Army Attaché in China from 1989 to 1991. Dr. Newman taught for the University of Maryland Honors Program from 1992 to 2012. He currently teaches courses on counterterrorism, international terrorism, and America in the 60s at James Madison University. He is the author of JFK and Vietnam from 1992, Oswald and the CIA, 1995, and again in 2009, Quest for the Kingdom, The Secret Teachings of Jesus in the Light of Yogic Mysticism, 2011, and Where Angels Tread Lightly, The Assassination of President Kennedy, Volume 1, 2015. Dr. Newman is an expert in textual records interpretation and documents forensics. His skills have been widely sought by U.S. and foreign media organizations, including PBS, the History Channel, C-SPAN, NBC, and other news organizations. Dr. Newman has appeared on several occasions before various subcommittees of the U.S. House of Representatives to testify and or make presentations on U.S. government agencies' compliance with classified records release, laws, and the performance of the 9/11 Commission. Okay, so that's your bio, so let's get to the questions.
Okay.
What was the day of 9/11 like for you?
I could talk for an hour about that, but I won't. A couple of things that are really just seared into my brain. I was actually in my car driving to the University of Maryland when I heard the first tower was hit over the radio. And I was going through a neighborhood. I sped up and got a speeding ticket in between the first doing 35 and a 25, in between the first plane crashing into the towers and the second one. But the thing that I never seen before, I don't know if you've ever driven around Washington, D.C., it's pathological, especially around the Beltway. They call it the suicide circle. They have for years, and it's just crazy. And that day, within an hour after the Trade Center plane crashes in the Pentagon event, it was amazing. Everybody lined up real nice to get on or off the Beltway or other major arteries. I've never seen American drivers around here so orderly and polite and working with their fellow man than in the hours of that first day on 9/11.
Well, that's interesting. I have driven around D.C. It's a pain in the butt is what it is.
Yep.
So
those are the things that that stand out. I mean, like everybody else, it was glued to the TV set all day. My wife was actually working downtown, very close to the White House that day, and actually saw the plane come over. And I believe it went to into the Pentagon, flew a path there close to the White House.
Wow.
So, and it was low enough to make a big sound. Everybody saw it and heard it. You know, I was on the other side of the building. I was north. So I wasn't able to see it. But yeah, it was a. You know, you remember where you are, Dave, just like JFK was, if you were old enough to remember the assassination.
Well, it's funny. The reason that I asked this question of everybody, aside from wanting to know, you know, what was their day like? So I think that people would find that interesting. The one of the other reason that I asked that question is because it's funny how some people in Washington D.C. seemingly can't remember what they did that day.
Yeah,
but right. Everybody else can remember exactly. You know, if you're old enough, you can remember exactly what you were doing that day. What was the first thing that you questioned about 9/11?
Well, so at this point, I'm 51 years old almost. So I'm not young anymore. I've been through a lot of history. In fact, history is my academic credential. So the first thing that crossed my mind, by certainly within a few hours of the information streaming in, was this is just like the Tet Offensive in 1968. You know, they had so much information on the. We knew the Tet Offensive was coming. There was a big lie, though. They cut the figures in half, and the people that saw this thing coming couldn't believe it because they didn't think the Viet Cong had the numbers to pull it off. Well, it turns out they did. But the point is that something that big, well prepared, has to have had a footprint. And that thought that I had has been borne out. Of course they did, but at the time, you know, on the day, we didn't have any proof of who knew what at that point. But that was what I was thinking. This is crazy. Why weren't we standing out there waiting for these guys, just like they should have been catching them coming across the rice paddies in '68? It also reminded me because I was already teaching counterterrorism at the University of Maryland. It reminded me of the '93 attack on the World Trade Center. So this was another thought. This isn't their first attempt to take those buildings down, and I just couldn't believe that, as extensive as this operation was, that it hadn't been detected before it happened.
Well, that was one of the major lies after 9/11, is that we were told repeatedly that there were no warnings, that nobody had any idea that this could possibly happen. George W. Bush said on 2 separate occasions that he didn't have any inkling whatsoever. And then in May 2002, when the August 6th PDB was released, partially released, you know, that was a warning. So that's when I was off to the races. When I found out that we were being lied to, that's when I started my activism. But yeah, no, that was one of the biggest lies after 9/11. And we have heard from numerous people that we have every indication to believe they were well aware of what was coming and where it was coming and so on and so forth. Now, before we get started with the questions, I just want to say that there is a long established history between the Pakistani ISI and Al-Qaeda or individual terrorists like Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh, Osama bin Laden, and even Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. So much history that it would be impossible to cover it all in one show. Also, and I forgot to say this, I want to thank Dr. Peter Dale Scott for helping me get this interview together. He's a good man, a great writer, and I have a lot of respect for Dr. Scott. All right. Can you give us some background history on the Pakistani ISI's connections to terrorism?
Yeah, and to reiterate your point, any one of these questions, we could talk for hours. So I put together just some highlights of things about that question. The roots of the ISI's connections to terrorism grew out of a larger process that was unfolding for decades after the end of World War II. Basically, decolonization was happening all around the planet, and of course in the Middle East and Near East and South Asia. But what characterized that unfolding process, in a nutshell, was that nearly all of the secular nationalist movements failed in countries with predominantly Muslim populations, and in other places too, but certainly the countries that had predominantly Muslim populations, the secular nationalist movements just failed almost everywhere. And that failure is what laid the groundwork for a return to a term we call Islamic fundamentalism. Pakistan followed that pattern, especially with General Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq's regime. It was a coup d'etat in 1977. And Zia based his regime on the religious principles of Abu Lala Maududi, who had erected the modern concept of a modern Islamic State. And he's published several things, but his first book has a few headlines I will mention. Islam is all-encompassing. The Islamic State is for the entire world. It should not be limited to just the homeland of Islam. Jihad should be used to eliminate un-Islamic rule and establish the worldwide Islamic State. Islamic Jihad wishes to destroy all states and governments anywhere on the face of the earth which are opposed to the ideology and program of Islam, regardless of the country or the nation which rules it. So these were the centerpieces of Zia's government. As he put it together as Shira law, Shirazation or Islamization of Pakistan. And he, upon assuming power, promised neutral elections within 90 days, but quickly postponed them and started witch hunts and trials of Pakistani politicians. He was assisted by several right-wing Islamists and conservatives, especially by an intelligence unit, then the so-called political wing of the ISI, under a brigadier general by the name of Hafazul Hussain Siddiqui. The ISI, better to say that than Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence and Special Service Group, was crucial for the consolidation of power in Zia's regime. And he became the undisputed ruler of Pakistan, assuming the office of president in 1978, was granted power to dissolve the National Assembly at will, which he did, and replaced it in 1981 with the Majlis-e-Shura, or Consultative Council, the same exact name as the elite council bin Laden used to set up rule of Al-Qaeda. And Zia used his Majlis to help with the process of Islamization in Pakistan. So these events were taking place in Pakistan against the backdrop of the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan in December 1979 and its developing occupation of that country in the years that followed. So when we talk about terrorism, it's not, in the case of Pakistan and the ISI, which is where we're going in this conversation, I think it's important to lay this piece in, that the door was opened to Islamic fundamentalism by Zia's regime. And it's just a vectoring of circumstances that as he was doing that, the Soviet Union invaded the neighboring country, Afghanistan. And so that's what I would start out with that piece as a sort of history of how the ISI is pulled into what we know of it today, terrorism, international terrorism operations.
Fascinating stuff. And then, of course, during the Afghanistan-Russia war, the CIA, the Saudis, and the Pakistani ISI all collaborated to support the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union. and that Mujahideen later became known as Al-Qaeda. There's one thing I want to add to this. As I said earlier, there were connections between the ISI and certain individuals like Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh and Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. On October 19th, 2007, B. Rahman for Inbat Radif reported that, quote, Brigadier Ijaz Shah, a former officer of Pakistan's Inner Services Intelligence, used to be the handling officer of Osama bin Laden and Mullah Omar, the emir of the Taliban, end quote. I sent him an email, and when I asked Mr. Rahman, quote, what does it mean to be Osama bin Laden's handling officer for the Pakistani ISI, what is the responsibility of the person that has this particular job? And his response was, quote, the handling officer of a source in Indian and Pakistan intelligence agencies is the person who looks after the welfare of the source, keeps him motivated, and uses him as needed. The source cannot meet anybody else other than this handling officer except the head of the agency. One source, one handling officer is the general rule. This is to prevent the exposure of the operation and maintain its deniability. I understand in the CIA, they call him the running officer of a source, end quote. So that was a connection to Osama bin Laden, and Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh, I believe, also had the exact same handling officer, Ijaz Shah. So I just wanted to point that out to people. Okay, so what about the CIA's relationship to the Pakistani ISI? What can you tell us about that?
Well, again, Zia is at the pole position when we move to that question, because as soon as the Soviets invaded, he sets up a big meeting, which included the then head of the ISI, Lieutenant General Akhtar Abdur Rahman, and various others, General Khalid Mahmoud Arif, the Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman, and Muhammad Sharif, Admiral, head of the Navy. And it was a very high-level meeting, and the ISI chief called for basically a covert operation to arm the Islamic extremists and burn Kabul down to the ground. So that's how it started. Of course, the United States and other Western countries and Saudi Arabia, some other Gulf countries were interested in helping out. The United States had offered $325 million, which Zia said, nope, no doing that. That's peanuts. So anyway, he found himself in a position to ask for a lot of money. And it didn't take long, once Ronald Reagan was in there, called the Soviet Union the Evil Empire, and the U.S. financial aid was vastly increased, and we finally sent something they'd been asking for a long time, 40 F-16 jet fighters. And eventually, of course, in 1986, we gave the Mujahideen Stinger missiles, which turned the tide of the battle there. But all this was done through the CIA. And it was the largest operation the CIA has ever mounted, this one with the ISI to defeat the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. There were also U.S. Army Special Forces that were there as well. And these CIA officers and Special Forces worked at the operational level in the ISI in Pakistan, of course. Billions of dollars in arms, U.S. dollars, went to the Mujahideen militants. The ISI in Pakistan basically demanded control. I have seen stories and coverage that the CIA was skittish and didn't want to go in there. That's really, I don't think that's true. I think that this was a an arrangement that the Pakistanis demanded. Anyway, the covert operation was called Operation Cyclone, and a lot of the money had to be funded. There were really two ways the CIA and ISI worked out the financing. One was a big bank. It was called the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, belonged to the Bank of England. But this branch of it, the BCCI, we'll just call it the BCCI, was based in Pakistan. It was the largest Muslim bank in the world. It financed just about every major terrorist network in the world within a few years before it got closed. It was very closely connected to the ISI. And of course, it was one way the CIA could funnel money to the Mujahideen. Another very lucrative source that the CIA and ISI worked together on was to boost opium production that financed covert operations. And again, because of its position in the middle, the result was that the ISI's power grew by a quantum leap. This is nothing new, by the way. Going back to World War II, even before the CIA existed, its OSS precursors and OPC, Office of Policy Coordination precursors, used narcotics to finance operations against the regimes that the enemy in World War II, and then again to help prop up and the regimes we wanted, like in Italy, and stop the communists, so on. So drug money, this is not the first rodeo for being used on a large scale. The CIA was directly involved with the ISI in doing that because it was so lucrative. And just tie up the one loose end here about the CIA's deal, where they're going to, give advice to their counterparts in the ISI, but they're not going to do it. They're not going to be in there. This is the backyard of Pakistan as far as they're concerned, and nobody's going to touch it. They're going to do it. I've seen reports that said there were fewer than 10 American operatives in the region because it feared it would be blamed. U.S. feared it would be blamed, like in Guatemala. I don't think they ever minded being blamed for Guatemala. That's one of their star operations. Anyway, we had ways of getting people in there. And one of them, to give you an example, the CIA still needed to know. So they did break this arrangement. But the way they did that was covertly. In other words, they didn't ask permission. Oh, can I go in there today? They would send somebody who would appear to have no connection to anything who would get in there. It would have to be basically posing as an extremist, as an Islamic militant. We wanted to get into the Northern Front, go up there and talk to Azam and so on and see what was happening. And believe it or not, one of the most well-known terrorists for Al-Qaeda, his story, his triple agent, is Ali Muhammad. And we could go off on him, for a day or two. But while he was working at the JFK school, he decided he was going to go to Afghanistan, which is against all the rules. You can't go. And he was ordered not to go, and he did anyway. And he came back, and they wrote him up. They wanted to give him an Article 15, and all those the paperwork of his superiors went into what we call File 13 in the government. All right, he was protected by the Central Intelligence Agency. I'm pretty sure about that. I can't prove it, of course, because they're not letting us see the all the memos on this. But he was completely untouchable, and he went up there right at the crucial time when we needed eyes on the ground, and he brought back a couple of belts of dead Soviet soldiers. He said he killed and was showing them off at school, at the warfare school, and so he was able to do that. He spoke the language. But he was an American citizen. He married an American woman that was on the plane with him when he first got to the United States. So he's an American citizen who was walking around up there and was able to, I'm certain of it, provide that information to a very thirsty bunch of people who wanted to know how all this money was being spent and what was really going on as a check against what they were being told by their counterparts in the ISI. So anyway, what are we talking about here? The Mujahideen.
The CIA's relationship to the ISI.
Yeah, and what they're doing is not sort of the British boxing. This is terrorism. It's not called that because they're freedom fighters, right? Their country's been invaded. And but we're talking about their main modus operandi was sabotage and assassination operations, not just against the military, but the civilian targets too. They attacked convoys, bridges, roads, power lines, pipelines, radio stations, police stations, office buildings, air terminals, hotels, cinemas, and any other soft civilian targets they could. And so in another world, we call that terrorism. During a typical day in the border region with Pakistan, the Mujahideen would launch 800 rockets. Between April 85 and January 87, we carried out 23,000 shelling attacks on government targets, not military. They placed their own firing positions in or near little villages within range of Soviet artillery posts that Soviet retaliation would cause civilian deaths. And when my son, who had 2 tours up there with the 10th Mountain Division, they had the same problem. The Taliban were always, within 100 yards of a little village that had kids in it. The Mujahideen assassinated a lot of people, pro-regime Afghan political leaders. These were 5-man groups that this is reminiscent of what we know of Al-Qaeda. They would study their target for a long time, for months and months, before they, killed the person. Anyway, this is what I call Frankenstein. We created Frankenstein through the ISI to crash the Soviet Union, basically. And the problem is that even before it was over, in mid-'87, the Soviet Union announced it was going to withdraw its forces. And that didn't happen until February 9, but by that time everybody knew it was going on, so the Islamic jihadists in Afghanistan were already laying plans to implement Maldi's call to worldwide jihad. And Frankenstein was coming home to its creator, the evil Satan, the American homeland. And so what grew out of the CIA-ISI cooperation in Afghanistan led directly to the rest of the story, which was already underway while the last 2 years are being played out. Azam is the guy. Azam is the guy who set up the apparatus. He was very popular, had spent, all that time on the Northern Front in Afghanistan. And he set up and attended personally here in the United States the first conference of jihad in Brooklyn at the Al Farouk Mosque, and founded the Al-Qifa Network. That's a refugee sort of network in New York and other major U.S. cities. In mid-1987 was when the Soviet forces announced they were going to, and by 88, Azam is here in the United States, attending these big and promoting a worldwide jihad, and starting to raise money. There are other people who enter the story, which probably don't have time to go into, Wadi al-Haq and Mahmoud Abu Lima. Wadi al-Haq was later arrested for U.S. embassy bombings in 98. Abu Halima was in the Brooklyn cell. He was arrested for the first Trade Center attack. Anyway, they were out at an Islamic conference in 1988, December 1988, in Oklahoma City. So even as things wind down, the whole worldwide jihad thing is being launched. And so at various points along the story, you keep seeing the ISI involved. So, for example, everybody in terrorism studies knows about Ramzi Youssef. The real story is that we had a guy inside the cell, the Brooklyn cell, who a state trooper who ends up taking over the counterterrorism branch in the FBI in New York, doesn't like him, and so we lose our eyes and ears, and he's inside the cell, and he was going to be their bomber, right? He was going to turn them all in, but so he goes out, and Youssef replaces him. Well, Youssef is connected to Sheikh Abdul Rahman and Al Qaeda at that very time. And when he gets in here, it's a long story. He has a stooge with him who makes a scene at the airport. But anyway, their passports had been provided to them by the ISI. And so we have a long story in between the Afghanistan peace and when things, fire up for worldwide jihad and 9/11. There's a lot of years in there and a lot of stories to tell that all were points on a line meant to attack us. And so without getting into each and every one of those in our conversation today, always lurking in the background are people connected to Al Qaeda and Pakistan. The fact that bin Laden was a Saudi is less important than where he ended up. Was after a short time he was in Afghanistan, and then he was in Sudan, and then back in Afghanistan, and then in Pakistan.
One of the
Saudi Arabia.
I'm sorry. One of the things that you mentioned was that you had seen statements before showing that there was problems between the CIA and the ISI, or that the CIA was reluctant, and so on and so forth. But I think it was in May of 2001, somebody by the name of Selig Harrison had spoke about the extensive ties that we still had between the CIA and the ISI. And another thing that you reminded me of, the drone strikes in Pakistan. Publicly, the politicians argue against it, because the people of Pakistan hate them. So the politicians publicly denounce them, but behind the scenes, the Pakistan's intelligence is giving information to the CIA to be able to kill people. So, when you hear that there's a problem in the relationships between the CIA and the ISI, I question that.
Yeah, I was actually saying something a little bit different than that, but I agree with what you just said, that the CIA was skittish about being involved at all in this Afghanistan war and was much happier to have the ISI take care of everything. I don't think so. I think they would have preferred to have had much freer reign to move people around, assets around inside Afghanistan. So I don't believe that they were skittish about it at all. I think that was the deal. I think that the Pakistan side, the ISI, and the leadership at any one point in time, that would even include Bhutto before Musharraf got in there, wanted it that way. They didn't want the CIA to be pulling all the strings. They wanted their money, and sure, if there was some information, they could provide them. But Pakistan, so I think the CIA had to take that deal, is what I'm saying, and then they would break it too. They would send their own covert people around in there, like Ali Muhammad, trying to figure out, what was happening. But the relationship was certainly not troubled at the beginning. They were all on the same page, right? They had to defeat the Soviet Union in there. It was after Frankenstein came home here and started banging us on the head here, there, and all over the place, more places than people know about. Some of the stuff is still classified and being withheld, that the problem starts to develop. And it certainly got worse as you get closer to 9/11, because a lot of people start knowing what's going on. And Ahmed, General Ahmed, the ISI chief, has to play it real careful, because he doesn't want to let his counterpart, which would be the head of the CIA, know what's coming, or that he knows what's coming. So it gets awkward, as you get into 1999 and 2000 and 2001, but certainly not back then. You've got a long time between 89, when the Soviet Union pulls out, and 9/11. So 12 years.
One of the things that happened after 9/11 is that it seemed that Americans forgot that the ISI had connections to terrorism. In fact, that knowledge was protected for many years.
Yep.
It wasn't until within the last 5 or 6 years that they finally started to acknowledge it, but they've known about it for years. Just like with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the chief financiers of Al-Qaeda. And, this is nothing new to us. We've protected that knowledge. We protected it prior to 9/11. We hindered investigations into Saudi financing prior to 9/11. We did the same thing after 9/11. We continued to protect Saudi Arabia, and we also protected, I think, the Pakistani ISI. So after 9/11, there was a report that came out that said Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed, who was then head of the Pakistani ISI, ordered Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh to wire transfer $100,000 to Muhammad Atta. Now, after that report came out, over the course of several months and maybe years, the blaming Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh, that story went away, and then a bunch of different paymasters were put forward, using variations of his name, which was very confusing. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah. Let's see here. Let me go to where I want to go. Yeah, it's I like to call it a shell game. Basically, you're like a guy with two, shells, and you never know where the real thing is under which shell. It starts. This shell game began immediately after the 9/11 attacks, and continues up to December. So it takes place over about a 3-month period in time, and there are 4 acts involved. And it's an amazing story. I think it helps when you understand this. It helps you get your arms around why we're covering up so many things. One of the nice things about a huge event like 9/11 is that your official government spokespersons are compelled literally to stand before the TV cameras and go on television and all the talk shows on a daily basis. And for a long while, all day on the cable TV networks, that's what you would be seeing. And so it's interesting that a lot of the times they're telling the truth until they figure out that there's something that they didn't know that is really, really got to be held down. And that's really what characterizes this whole shell game. There comes a point in time when they figure out that it is Omar Saeed Sheikh. And so you have a story that takes place before that, which reflects basically what they thought for real. And then they get to a point where they figure out what the truth is, and that has to be suppressed. And then, when it is suppressed, they come up with the final act, another false name, to go to the top of the FBI's wanted list. So that's the overview of it. But the first paymaster, they knew right away. They found out from the United Arab Emirates in Dubai. That's where all the money was coming from, to Atta and the hijackers. And they came up. The first paymaster was an Egyptian. They thought, and his name was Mustafa Ahmed. Excuse me. Actually, let me just back up. The name, the alias of the Dubai paymaster was Mustafa Ahmed al-Hassawi. And so this first guy, an Egyptian, his name was Mustafa Ahmed. So it's got a Mustafa in it, and it's got an Ahmed in it. So why not, right? Sounds similar to the alias. Anyway, that was on September 24th. We're talking about 2 weeks out, a little less than 2 weeks out from the attacks. So then anyway, Newsweek reports that this guy, Mustafa Ahmed, had sent money to the hijackers, and they're quoting a government official and so on about that story. His full name was Mustafa Mahmoud Saeed Ahmed, all right? But here's the thing. This is a fascinating story about who this guy really is. That is his name. But PBS, Frontline, after the 9/11 attacks, had done an investigation, basically looking at the, mostly I think at the 1998 attacks on our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. And they discovered that in November 1997, this guy, Mustafa Mahmoud Saeed Ahmed, had walked into a U.S. embassy in Nairobi, Kenya, and told the CIA agent there that he knew of a, quote, plan to detonate a truck bomb in the parking garage of the embassy, unquote. Now, during his Kenyan interrogation at the time, he told Kenyan police that he had, quote, cased the embassy and photographed the building, unquote. Frontline then reports that for unknown reasons, the CIA did not take Mr. Ahmed's statement seriously. The CIA issued 2 intelligence reports on Ahmed's warning that called into question his credibility. Ahmed was merely deported to Egypt. But Ahmed's story does not stop there. A year later, in 1988, he shows up in Tanzania, where he organizes the transfer of funds from Middle Eastern Bank to the Saudi-financed Greenland Bank of Tanzania to bankroll the embassy bombings. So apparently, this financial work that he did then was what the post-9/11 press briefings were thinking about when they thought he could be the paymaster, as well as the 2 parts of his name that seemed to be close to the Dubai alias. And anyway, after his arrest, the Tanzanian government says Mustafa is either the mastermind behind the bombing or is a key person in the bombing conspiracy, and they lock him up in the Ukanga maximum security prison. Well, if that's where the story would end, it would be just, bad, silly CIA for not taking the story seriously. Here's what happens. Less than a year later, in mid-1999, without warning and without fully explaining the reasons, the Tanzanian prosecutors dropped all charges against Ahmed, released him from jail, and bought him a one-way ticket to Cairo. In a post-9/11 press briefing, a U.S. government official stated that it was Ahmed in Dubai that 9/11 pilot Mohammed Attaché mailed the package to from Florida a week before the attack. So here's the first paymaster. A really... I'm sure they would like to have gotten even with him, but 3 days later, after announcing that he was our guy, his name simply disappears from the 9/11 investigation. And U.S. commentators, officials, they didn't say publicly why they dropped him in favor of another Egyptian al-Qaeda operative whose name was Sheikh Saeed. So this is Act 2. On October 1st, U.S. investigators announced they found a smoking gun linking bin Laden to the 9/11 attacks. They told The Guardian his name was Sheikh Saeed, an Egyptian also known as Mustafa Mohammed Ahmad. The same day, BBC quotes FBI sources saying the same thing, that the paymaster was Mustafa Mohammed Ahmad, also known as Sheikh Saeed. So we'll call this guy Paymaster number 2. Neither story points out that this Egyptian was not the man arrested in Tanzania in 1980, Mustafa Mahmoud Saeed Ahmed. You can see how U.S. reporters might have their eyeballs rolling back in their heads with all these names. Both stories said that U.S. investigators believed that the paymaster, Mustafa Mohammed Ahmad, had worked as a financial manager for bin Laden while the al-Qaeda chief was in Sudan, and he was still a trusted paymaster of al-Qaeda. So the BBC's coverage likewise dropped the first Egyptian, Mustafa Mahmoud Saeed Ahmed, for the new one, Mustafa Mohammed Ahmad. And FBI sources were happy to say that this is the guy, and because he is a trusted finance chief, this is it. This is how we can show, because the al-Qaeda didn't accept responsibility for quite some time for this thing. And this is how they could pin it, or apparently so, on bin Laden. The thing is that this new identification was partly wrong and partly right. Mustafa Mohammed Ahmad, number 2, had indeed worked as a financial manager of bin Laden. However, he wasn't, as we now know, he wasn't the 9/11 paymaster, nor was he the al-Qaeda finance chief, Sheikh Zayed. The intriguing thing about the BBC story is they got a couple of things right. Bin Laden's finance chief was the Dubai paymaster. The FBI was also correct in assessing the name Sheikh Zayed was an alias. What they apparently still didn't know at this point is that it was one of the 17 aliases used by Omar Ahmed Saeed Sheikh. And he was exactly what bin Laden needed when they broke him out of jail. We can get to that story elsewhere in the conversation here, because he was from the London School of Economics, and bin Laden's finance chief had been arrested in the wake of the 98 bombings in Africa. So anyway, guess what happens? Very soon, Mustafa Mohammed Ahmad, just like number 1 guy, Mustafa Mahmoud Saeed Ahmed before him, would be dropped as the Dubai paymaster. The 9/11 Commission report did not include either of these 2 Egyptians among the extensive list of those connected to the 9/11 plot. Names weren't even in the report. But for 3 brief days in October 2001, paymaster number 2 had become the FBI's choice for the 9/11 paymaster and al-Qaeda's finance chief. So the real news, actually, that was true, was that bin Laden's finance chief was the paymaster. All right, so they're happy they got the smoking gun at this point.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Then it becomes Omar, okay? He becomes the guy. And I think we should talk about that separately when we get to who's Omar and who's General Ahmad. And it's a fascinating story, but they find out on the 6th of October. In fact, I'll just do it quickly now so that maybe, or maybe not, we won't have to come back to that.
Just so I understand, on October 6th, Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh is named as the paymaster?
Correct. That's next. This is Act 3. And that's when it happens. That's the first indication. Well, the government knew, the FBI knew before that day, because it's the FBI team that makes the discovery. But our sources, they're really just 3, and it takes place in a very short period of time. And then this whole story has to get killed. And you're right. October the 6th, CNN lets the big first surprise out. But it's not the whole of the story, but it's certainly part of it, and the most important part. They identify this Dubai alias, Mustafa Ahmed al-Hassawi, as Omar Saeed Sheikh, quote, the man released from prison in India less than 2 years ago after hijackers of an Indian Airlines flight demanded his freedom. There's no doubt who we're talking about here. They've identified Omar Sheikh as the Dubai paymaster. And so that's act number 3. The second source is also CNN. 2 days later, we now, they include the $100,000 story. In other words, what happens is that Omar wires $100,000 to Attaché because they needed a little more money for all the final reconnaissance flights and the final flights on the day of 9/11. And so this dovetails into that whole story about how they got that money. There's a kidnapping of a shoe businessman and so on that it's associated. But just going through, just trying to stay focused here on the name shell game. So CNN 10-6, Omar is the paymaster. CNN 10-8, he wired $100,000, but it's not in CNN. What is not there is that the guy who ordered him to do it was the chief of the ISI, General Ahmad. It's the India Times 1 day later on the 9th that provides that detail. So from the 6th to the 9th, you got 3 days in October where first we learn Omar's the paymaster, that he wired $100,000 to Attaché, and that the person who instructed him to do that was the head of the ISI, and the FBI found this out when they ran traces on Omar's cell phone number 0300-945-8772, and they found out that beginning in July that number was used often by Omar to communicate with the ISI chief. And as fast as that happened, that story was suppressed. And
well, it was originally broken by the Times of India, I believe, and then Agence France Presse, I believe, confirmed the story.
Would that be
Everybody always says it was the Times of India. It's an Indian newspaper. You can't trust India when they're reporting on Pakistan, and et cetera, and so on. But it was corroborated by Agence France Presse, I believe.
Yeah, but what's the date of that for Agence France Presse?
Oh, I don't remember. I don't have it in front of me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've got them too, but I don't have them beating CNN to the punch there. In other words, I'm looking at the very first moment that it became public. The Indian Times one I have is October the 9th. That's only one day after the second CNN thing. And the only way CNN is going to know about this isn't going to be from India Times. It's going to be from the FBI. They're the ones who made the discovery. So I don't know how soon the India Times, but certainly the India Times had no qualms talking about this because it is India. I agree with that much, but it doesn't make it not true.
Right, exactly. I found over the years that Indian reporting with regards to the ISI generally turns out to be accurate.
Good, yeah, because they had their phone lines tapped. They were pretty good, and the FBI got in on the action. Anyway, let me just finish out the name shell game thing, so we can focus on other aspects of this whole big story. So, and we can. The explanation for why it has to be suppressed is because Omar had been a double agent working for MI6. We can talk about this in more detail and when it happens and so on, but that's what he had been, and that's what they thought, that we had a highly placed source reporting to Western intelligence at the top levels of Al-Qaeda. But it turns out he's not a double agent. He's what we call in the business a triple agent. He's been feeding us. A triple agent must feed the agency that he's been doubled by, in this case the Brits. It's got to be feeding them good stuff for them to keep buying. Ali Muhammad did that to us too. He was a triple agent. So this is a big gotcha between the eyes, and it took all of 72 hours before the CIA and the White House were on top of this thing to suppress it. So the final act in this is a Saudi businessman, and without going into all the details, it's a silly story. There's two small fragments in a Irish publication. That's the only basis for it. But anyway, they hang it on a fourth guy, and at the same time, and this is another part of the story I know you want to talk about, is finally when the United States secretly indicts Omar for 1994 kidnapping of an American in India. So they secretly indict him and just banish him from the story by going to the fourth and final name, which goes to the top of the list of the FBI's most wanted. The thing is, by the time we get to the 9/11 Commission report, that name's gone too. And there's all kinds of monkey business in the 9/11 report when it comes to this story about Omar and the paymaster and so on and so forth. But anyway, it was four acts of a play where very briefly the truth was discovered, it was shared with the public, and then just as fast suppressed by the highest level, not just the CIA, by President Bush himself.
Okay, you mentioned that he was a triple agent.
Yes.
And that he was working for MI6 as well as the ISI. I have some news accounts with regards to this. Quote, when FBI agents questioned Sheikh earlier this month about his relationship with the ISI, Sheikh's answers were elliptical. Quote, I will not discuss this subject, end quote. One source quoted him as saying, quote, I do not want my family to be killed, end quote. and this was Newsweek, March 13th, 2002. Quote, "There are many in Musharraf's government who believe that Saeed Sheikh's power comes not from the ISI, but from his own connections with our own CIA." End quote. And that was the Pittsburgh Tribune Review.
Yeah, I've seen the Pittsburgh Review, but I don't agree with it. I think it's a
I don't.
Say. It's
that was
logical. We would have loved to have run him as our double, but it didn't make any sense. The guy was already a Brit and had access to, the moms there that were fundamentalists, and with the Al Hadid, this is a terrorist group in Britain, and so he had a cover. He could go to England to visit his parents, right? So he had a wonderful cover to work for MI6. It made a lot more sense that the MI6 would run him than the CIA. But certainly the CIA was beneficiary of what MI6 was learning. So we share at very high levels with the Brits in not just in human intelligence, but other of the intelligence, the ints like SIGINT and those things, very sensitive things. So he is. Oh, by the way, I know that it's a question you have put on your list that Musharraf has said this too in his book In the Line of Fire, which I've read. I have that book, but Musharraf calls him a double agent, and that just shows you that Musharraf is more of a general than he is an intelligence practitioner. He certainly knows a lot about it because he's running the country. But look, let's start off with just an agent. Right? An agent is working for an intelligence agency in a country. Now, when you become a double agent, you have become recruited by an agency, usually of another power, whether it's still friendly, like could be a European country. Let's start with a U.S. agent. So if he's doubled, he could be doubled by even a friendly power to report to them, or to a hostile power, Soviet Union, or Pakistan, or whoever. That's a double agent. But a triple agent is one who, in his act or her activities as a double agent, is actually working for the other side all along, and is simply feeding you good stuff, so that his bona fides will be accepted. Otherwise, they can't get away with it. So we've had some really famous ones. There's Ali Muhammad is the most celebrated triple agent, but it is still a matter of national security that Omar Ahmed Saeed Sheikh was the biggest one of all, because it's got 9/11 on the other end of it.
Right.
And it's very embarrassing for MI6 and the CIA. It's embarrassing for the ISI. It's embarrassing for Pakistan. And we're trying to go into Afghanistan, we and the British, right? In the days after this huge discovery has been made. We're airdropping people in there. And, for Musharraf, it's like a dagger in his hands here. He gets a phone call from the Deputy Secretary of State that basically says, we will bomb you into the Stone Age unless you do X, Y, and Z. That's why you get the title of the book, In the Line of Fire. It's really, really a crossover point. We find out that he was a triple all along, that we had misplayed him, just like we had misplayed Ali Muhammad. And it's terrible. We have a terrible, terrible record of getting rid of good doubles and being fooled by double agents who are actually triples. And there's another one that I really don't want to go into today that has to do with Oklahoma City. It took me about 15, 20 years to figure out. And those are the most sensitive stories of all. And you can't try. Why hasn't it been tried? You can't have a real trial of a triple agent or even a double agent without blowing the doors off of all the case officers that have been involved.
Well, that's one instance. This is an interesting story to me. After 9/11, after it was Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh was named as the paymaster, we indicted him for a crime that he committed years prior. So it was obvious that the U.S. wanted him, but they did not want to tie him to 9/11.
Right, that had to be suppressed.
Exactly. Now, with regards to the shell game, as you refer to it.
Can I expand on that point you just made, just really briefly?
Sure.
We'll go back to the shell game. So, national security, quote unquote, is the political expedient that made it necessary to decouple Omar from 9/11. But the United States had no intention of letting him get off scot-free and getting away with all this stuff. So that's why when they decide to go ahead with the indictment, they hang him for something. They indict him for, he should have been indicted all along, right? He should have been indicted right away for that. But
right.
He was never indicted. He wasn't indicted or tried in India. After they break him out of prison, he's allowed to walk a free man all over England, and the families are outraged for the people who died, Brits who died because of his activities. He's never indicted anywhere in India, in Great Britain, or the United States, all this time until after 9/11.
Right.
And so, but it's a secret indictment, and it's not until mid-November, that they indict him. They go a whole month till they finally work out this fourth act in the shell game, and then secretly indict him. And it's not released. The indictment isn't publicly released until late February 2002. The Pearl thing is already going on. It's too late. It doesn't matter. Omar's never being extradited. But here's the kicker. Who is trying to get him to come here? It's the Justice Department and the FBI, and the problem is the White House won't buy. The story is that they had been leaning on the National Security Council trying to get him extradited. And actually, the CIA doesn't want that. It was the Justice Department was trying to do it. The CIA knows the whole skinny. They don't want it, and neither does President Bush. And so they're happy not to be bringing him back here, and there can't be a trial. And we don't want him to talk. So he's not going to say anything to the FBI, and I think that's pretty perfunctory. That it just was one interview. It's the only thing the U.S. people ever got to talk to him, just once. And they don't want to kill him either, for a couple of reasons. I'm talking about the Pakistanis, because number one, he still has information that they want, and number two, there's a lot of reason why he will continue to play that game. I'm certain that the only people he's talked to and said anything truthful to about all his past stories are going to be Pakistani intelligence.
Right, like people like Ejaz Shah and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think he's going to talk to anybody else, and I think everybody's happy with that in London and Washington.
Well, okay. Now, with regards to the different variations of his name, I was going through a monograph from the 9/11 Commission. It's called the 9/11 Terrorist Financing Monograph. And I found a name in there for a financier of Al-Qaeda that was very similar to Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh. And it says, quote, "Before 9/11, Al-Qaeda was reportedly highly organized with a committee structure that included the Finance Committee. Credible evidence indicates that bin Laden played a significant role in planning each operation and was very attentive to financial matters. Other than bin Laden, the person with the most important role in Al-Qaeda financing was reportedly Sheikh Qari Saeed. Saeed, a trained accountant, had worked with bin Laden in the late 1980s when they fought together in Afghanistan, and then for one of bin Laden's companies in Sudan in the early to mid-1990s. Saeed was apparently notoriously tight-fisted with Al-Qaeda's money. Operational leaders may have occasionally bypassed Saeed and the Finance Committee and requested funds directly from bin Laden. Al-Qaeda members apparently financed themselves for day-to-day expenses and relied on the central organization only for operational expenses." And that is from the 9/11 Commission monograph on terrorist financing. Now, again, I looked him up, Sheikh Qari Saeed. I can't find a damn thing about him anywhere.
Right. He's number 4. This is act number 4. I've lost my notes here. I've done so much stuff, and I'm getting ready for this interview. But yeah, and that, look, Omar was the guy running finances. From the time he got out of jail, he went straight to bin Laden. And he was put at the very apex of the organization. He was overnight placed on the Majlis al-Shura with bin Laden. Bin Laden called him my special son. He was the heir apparent, going to be the heir apparent to succeed bin Laden.
Right, I remember reading that.
So, and here's what his folder, what he takes care of. First thing that happens is he breaks ranks with Azhar, the guy that he hooked up with, the terrorist in prison. He was trying to bring Azhar out when he got caught, and he got put in prison way back in '94. So he's back now, and he breaks with Azhar for various reasons. He doesn't like him. Incidentally, Azhar formed a new, that was Hum, I forget the expansion of that. It was his original group. He forms a new one, Jaish-e-Mohammed, at this time when Omar overhauls Al-Qaeda. And Azhar founds this movement actually at the Banori Town Mosque in Karachi. You know, that's the one Pearl was caught sneaking around in, by the way. Anyway, Omar now is out from under Azhar. Initially, he's reporting directly to Abu Zubaydah, the operations chief, but his portfolio, that's what I want to say, quickly becomes significant. He overhauls the entire financial network of Al-Qaeda, all their logistics networks, and their communications networks. He's also given responsibility for international liaison with the Hezbollah, the Sudanese National Front, and in the UK. And he's also a liaison from the ISI to these various groups in Afghanistan. In connection with his financial overhaul, he does a couple of things. Number one, sets up a mini stock exchange from a computer in the Kandahar safe house with online access to worldwide stock exchanges. And why does he do that? Because when they're going to sell short any equities that would be most damaged, like insurance companies, because of the 9/11 attack. There are all kinds of financial things going on that have been looked into by people who've been stopped because it would show that had happened. He designed a new secure encrypted web-based communication system for finances and communications generally for Al-Qaeda. And to bring in even more money, he took control of and overhauled and improved the whole opium, the whole narcotics trafficking thing. And that's why there was talk that he would one day succeed bin Laden. He operated across the entire front of Al-Qaeda's operations. Was in a great position to feed us real information, sell out some guys. They do that. And then, keep the lid on the big one for 9/11. So I think that the way that the 9/11 Commission report got around this stuff was to not connect various aliases that like, just like you said, when you go try and find them out, they don't seem to be born anywhere and have a past. And to try not to say something that is a lie, but just to not say stuff, to give you the appearance that it is what it isn't. So I'm with you. I don't think this guy exists at all. I think it was just the end of the whole shell game. They had to come up with something. They'd already dumped the first two guys when they ran into Omar. It became necessary to figure out how we're going to handle it, and they did. And the 9/11 Commission basically has obscured this part of the story too.
Well, let me comment on the 9/11 Commission for a minute. This is an entry from historycommons.org. It's June 20th, 2004. 9/11 Commission figure says Pakistan was, quote, up to their eyeballs with Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Quote, an unnamed senior staff member, end quote, on the 9/11 Commission tells the Los Angeles Times that before 9/11, Pakistani officials were, quote, up to their eyeballs, end quote, in collaboration with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. As an example, this source says of bin Laden moving to Afghanistan in 1996, quote, he wouldn't go back there without Pakistan's approval and support and had to comply with their rules and regulations, end quote. From, quote, day one, end quote, the ISI helped Al-Qaeda set up an infrastructure and jointly operated training camps. The article further notes that when the Commission will publicly say, well, the Commission will publicly say on this is just the, quote, tip of the iceberg, end quote, of the material they've been given on the matter. Now, there was a last-minute document given to the 9/11 Commission, apparently. This is according to the Washington Times. It's a report from July 22nd, 2004. According to the Washington Times, quote, on the eve of the publication of its report, the 9/11 Commission was given a stunning document from Pakistan claiming that Pakistani intelligence officers knew in advance of the 9/11 attacks, end quote. Now, are you familiar with the Jersey Girls and so forth?
No, I'm familiar with that they did know before the fact.
Well, okay, the Jersey Girls were the four widows responsible for the creation of the 9/11 Commission.
Right, okay.
They were Lori Van Auken, Mindy Kleinberg, Patty Casaza, and Kristen Brotweiser. And they submitted a question to the 9/11 Commission about this very incident. And this is a report from the Washington Times, quote, on May 15, 2003, a group of 9/11 victims' relatives met with the Commission co-chairman, Thomas Keane, and other senior staff and submitted a list of questions, which included a mention of Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed. On June 17, 2004, the New York Times reported that Lori Van Auken, one of the Jersey Girls, whose husband died in the World Trade Center, was, quote, irate that the June 16th Commission narrative on the 9/11 attacks did not even mention the allegation about Ahmed's role in the $100,000 transfer to Mohammed Atta. Clearly, the ISI is no mere conspiracy theory, end quote. And the New York Times piece said, quote, Ms. Van Auken was irate that there was no mention of an accusation that General Mahmoud Ahmed, the head of Pakistan's intelligence services, ordered the transfer of $100,000 to Mohammed Atta. Now, Thomas Keane was confronted about the $100,000 wire transfer in 2006, and he said he wasn't even aware of it, which is a little ridiculous to think, because it was a pretty big story. A lot of people were promoting it and so on and so forth. Now, there was one document from the 9/11 Commission, a memoranda for the record for Adam Drucker, an FBI agent, from May 19th, 2004. And in that document, it says, quote, there is absolutely no evidence Atta received a wire transfer from the Pakistani ISI. There is no unexplained wire transfer or any unexplained funds at all, end quote. But before this quote and after this quote, it's highly redacted. And their names aren't even mentioned, Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed or Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh. So I don't trust the 9/11 Commission. We've gone over this on my show before. They were completely corrupt and compromised. So you're right. They did not address the issue. They wouldn't even say, I've never once heard an official in the American government explain why this is untrue, if it is untrue. I've never heard anybody explain why. So with that, why don't we get into the next question? Who are Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed and Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh? And you kind of pretty much explained who Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh was.
Which one did you want me to start with?
Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed, who was that guy?
Okay, yes. In the interest of time, just to try and hit the the high points, we should begin with the coup in 1999 that put him into power. It's an ironic thing. The way it happened was he was kind of responsible. It didn't intend this to happen, but he goaded his prime minister to go into Kashmir, and when the prime minister did that, it kind of blew up in his face, and Clinton basically told him, that if you guys don't stop this, we're gonna go worldwide public with all the terrorist stuff you guys are into, and this touched off a really bad blood between, I'm looking for the name of the guy that was ousted here. Too many names. In any event, so what happened?
Sharif, wasn't it Sharif?
Yeah, Sharif, exactly, Sharif. And so Sharif is going to fire Musharraf and the generals for he's going to blame them on this thing. So that's how it starts. And Musharraf finds out because one of the top generals calls him. He's out of the country, and tells him this is going to happen. And so Musharraf hops on a plane. He's chief of Pakistan's army at the time, by the way. He's the second in command. So he gets the call from Lieutenant General Muhammad Aziz Khan, who coordinates the coup on the ground with Musharraf on the way in. It's either that or get rid of Musharraf too. So Musharraf's going to be taken over. They're afraid that Sharif has buckled under to the United States, and they're afraid that's going to happen in the future. They don't really know everything about Musharraf, but he's going to be the guy. So Aziz Khan had been the staunchest defender of the Taliban while working for the ISI, one of the most pious Islamist generals. In the heat of the coup, Aziz Khan worked with the commander of the 10th Corps, Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed. That's our guy we're talking about here. Also an Islamist who ordered troops from nearby Rawalpindi to enter the capital. The coup almost failed when the air controllers at the Karachi airport refused to let Musharraf's plane land. It had no gas left. But they changed their mind when another general, General Usmani, the Karachi Corps commander, took control of the airport and surrounded the control tower. So while Musharraf himself was probably not an extremist Islamist, the generals who put him there in power clearly were. Aziz Khan remained the Army Chief of General Staff, second in rank after Musharraf himself, and for their roles in the coup, Usmani became Army Deputy Chief of Staff, and Mahmoud Ahmed became Chief of the ISI. One of the first acts of Musharraf as a new ruler was to cancel the top-secret mission being planned with the CIA to send commandos into Afghanistan to capture bin Laden. So that's how the guy comes into power, and they cut off the CIA planned mission to capture bin Laden. I would fast forward to spring 2000. This is where things really go south between the ISI and the CIA. The story is, in the short version, that Mahmoud becomes a, quote, and this is what they said in Pakistan, a, quote, born-again Muslim. And to just cut to the chase here rather than go into all the details, he actually comes to Washington and has a falling out with the State Department, and he's given a dressing down, and he goes back to Pakistan and basically cuts off the CIA. And they're no longer, this is 2000 now, in the spring of 2000. Basically, the CIA is no longer able to plug in the ISI at the operational level. The next major thing I would put in his story is it looks like he's anticipating the attack, and by April 2001, he apparently attempted to have Musharraf assassinated. Musharraf lived through that. And also he...
Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed tried to assassinate Musharraf?
No. Yes, that there was an assassination attempt that the ISI was involved in. And this was in the spring, because they were already fearful that Musharraf was not going to be able... They wanted him out of the way before 9/11. I can't prove that, but I have a lot of details here that I could refer to in support of that. So we'll just call that a possible or probable. But there's more pieces to this. Mahmoud, goes to Afghanistan to meet Mullah Omar, the head of the Taliban, and plead with him to get bin Laden out of there because they know that the attack is coming. And so there's going to be reprisals. The Americans are going to go nuts. And so the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Crown Prince Abdullah, and General Mahmoud Ahmed, the ISIS, they go there together to try and get Mullah Omar to get rid of bin Laden. And this is still in the spring. So in addition to an assassination attempt on Musharraf, they're in there also trying to get bin Laden out of the way. And Mullah Omar refuses, says he's our guest, and so on. And there's a couple other things that happen too. So what happens in the end is that George Tenet goes over there to Islamabad. He meets with him. He invites him to come back to the United States to work things out, right? George Tenet's head of the CIA at the time, and things have gone into a glacial freeze. And so he's invited to come to Washington to meet with the CIA and other senior leaders in September 2001. And he doesn't say no. For him to say no would have raised antennae. So he has to accept. And so he comes to Washington, and on the morning of September 11th, 2001, at 8 o'clock, he's having a quiet breakfast with Representative Porter Goss and other members of the House Intelligence Committee. The chairman of two congressional intelligence committees were talking. You had Porter Goss and Senator Bob Graham. They're talking to him. And while they're talking, and they're talking about terrorism, especially generated from Afghanistan, says Graham. Anyway, so somebody walks in with a note, and Porter Goss looks at it, hands it to Graham. It said, "A plane just hit World Trade Center." Goss fairly scribbles a reply and asks for aid to find out more. And so while they're waiting to find out more, they're talking some more with Mahmoud. He was very empathetic, very sympathetic to the people of the United States. He said, I tell you, this is an acting performance worthy of an award, because you have to wonder what's going through his mind as he absorbs the news. He understands, he has to understand there's an attack underway. Was he confident the Americans wouldn't know he was behind the ransom money that had been sent to Attaché for the plane that just flew into the Trade Center?
Right.
So within moments, the note comes in. It's another plane and so on, and then they cancel the meeting. But anyway, he's actually physically sitting here with our top guys in Congress during the attack.
Well, it also should be said that prior to 9/11, those same individuals that were meeting with him on the day of 9/11 met with him in Pakistan in the weeks prior to 9/11. Also, during the week of 9/11 in Washington, D.C., he met with individuals from the Pentagon and unspecified individuals at the White House, and so on and so forth. So then we get to 9/11, and the news about Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh being the paymaster comes out. Then the news that he did so under the orders of Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed. Then what happens?
it's crushed. The story's crushed.
Well, but I mean, I'm talking about to Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed. Musharraf sacks
so
him.
Musharraf sacks him. He fires him. But what's really interesting about it is the excuse he uses for being involved with the Taliban. Like everybody in Pakistan is involved with the Taliban, you know? So it's a silly excuse.
And it was reported that it was due to U.S. pressure.
Yeah, that's in the newspapers, but not what Musharraf said. Musharraf's public excuse, was that he had been supporting the Taliban. One of the Indian newspapers, maybe even a Pakistani newspaper, said it was done because of CIA pressure, American pressure. You're right. And I'm sure it's true. It could have been the Undersecretary of State who threatened to bomb him back into the Stone Age if he didn't do what he was told.
Well, to my knowledge, nobody in the FBI, none of the investigations that have taken place, any of them have ever spoken to Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed. I would think that they would at least like to talk with him, you know, or maybe put him under a polygraph and so forth, but that's never happened.
At the time, you got to realize who's in the White House, and that's Bush, and that's not going to happen while he's there.
Right.
Cheney,
now there are, right. I know. Now there are a few stories about when and where Atta received the $100,000 from Sheikh. What is the most likely scenario? And I believe it has to do with Ansari.
Yeah, the guy that Omar met in prison back in '94. That's an alias. His real name is Aftab Malik. But to broadly address the question you're asking about the scenario, the ransom scenario, I've got there are several sources that I rely on. One of the earlier ones is the German Internal Security Service. Their informants told them that Omar Saeed Sheikh had sent a draft of $100,000 to Atta. How would they know? Because they were infiltrating the Hamburg cell, you know, way back when Atta was there. So there are German sources that also carry the story as getting it not from the FBI or the Indians, from their own informants, German Internal Security Service. Then you have the big break we've been talking about. The FBI team in the first week of October finds out about it, as reflected, as we said, in the CNN stories and also India Times during those few days. But there's another chapter to this, which is the Los Angeles Times in late January of 2002. It resurfaces because there's another attack that's carried out. This isn't the one that takes place in early October, by the way, that Omar and Ahmed are involved in that one too. But there's another one against the United States, I guess it's the USIA office in India, in Calcutta. And the story is that it's pulled off of the same people who were used for the ransom payments to bankroll September 11 strikes in America. And this story is extensive. It tells a lot of the story about Saeed Sheikh, the real Omar, him being the one who sent the money to Atta, the $100,000. But it's curious. They leave out one thing. They do not mention that Ahmed, the ISI chief, was behind it and ordered it, even though they're basing their story on India Today, which is a magazine. And there are two articles in India Today, January 8th and February 2nd. They do mention the ISI chief's role in it. So the LA Times runs this story on 22 January 2002. It puts everything in there except for General Ahmed's role, which is strange. I mean, they had to be aware of it, but they deleted that part of the story.
Well, there's one thing you meant. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Well, there was one thing you mentioned that they took part. The same individuals, Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed, Omar Saeed Sheikh, and so forth, took part in a terrorist attack against the United States. You said, And we should point
USIA,
out...
yes, this is in 2002.
Okay, we should point out that on October 1st, 2001, and this is an entry from History Commons, Kashmir suicide attack involves 9/11 funder Saeed Sheikh. And it says a suicide truck bomb attack on the provincial parliamentary assembly in Indian-controlled Kashmir leaves 36 dead. It appears that Saeed Sheikh and Aftar Ansari, the people who were involved in the the kidnapping of the shoe salesman, where they got the money to send the $100,000, working with the ISI, are behind the attacks. And that's according to Pittsburgh Tribune Review and Vanity Fair. Indian intelligence claims that Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf is later given a recording of a phone call between Jaish-e-Mohammed leader Molanda Masood Azhar and ISI Director Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed, in which Azhar allegedly reports that the bombing is a, quote, success. So not only are there allegations that Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed and Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh took part in 9/11, but there are allegations that they took part in other terrorist attacks. So that gives credence and credibility to this whole 9/11 story, in my mind.
It does. And it was the third one, which may not involve Omar, but still involves the ISI chief. No, he's gone. Anyway, it involves the same gangster, Aftab Ansari. They figure out his name, by the way. It's Aftab Milak. Had been used in the shoe kidnapping incident. So the fourth, what we were doing here, we were running through the $100,000 scenario, and there are all these sources that all, we got three good ones now, and the fourth actually occurs in 2004, who's a British MP. And right on the floor, he makes this big speech, and he's basically, I think, poking fun at the United States for not saying anything about this, and also poking fun at, or actually being critical, I think, of Pakistan for not indicting and trying, Omar for the.
You're talking about Michael Meacher.
Yeah, exactly. And he could have mentioned why, he could have mentioned his own country, like why didn't they indict and try Omar? He was walking around a free man.
No.
But to have a British MP in 2004 bringing this stuff up again is interesting.
Well, I spoke with Michael Meacher. I corresponded with him years ago and, tried to corroborate everything that he said and so forth. And one of the things that he did mention was an individual by the name of Dennis Lormel, who was an FBI agent, who talked about a $100,000 wire transfer to Mohammed Atta during some of these Senate sessions. But if you read the transcript, he doesn't confirm that the $100,000 that they're talking about is the $100,000 from Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed to Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh to Mohammed Atta. It's a $100,000 wire transfer that took place a year prior to that. So I think Michael Meacher got a little bit confused, and then I just tried to get him as an interview, but he declined. So, and I tried contacting Dennis Lormel. I sent him an email. I found out where he was working. I called him. He said he couldn't talk right now, to send him an email. And basically, the end result was he had no comment because he never returned my calls, and a whole bunch of other things. Now, so basically, after the 9/11 attacks happened, and after it was found out that Ahmed and Sheikh were involved in paying Atta, Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh is involved in the kidnapping of Danny Pearl. And he was, I believe, found guilty for the murder of Daniel Pearl. But it was years later that it was found out that it was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed that was the one to actually murder Danny Pearl, and Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh was only involved in getting him to that area where he could be killed. And Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh has been sitting in prison since that time, and there are a few things that I'd like to point out. There were allegations that he was running a terrorist network from prison, and this is a quote. In a sensational development, authorities have claimed busting a clandestine terror network set up by jailed killer of Daniel Pearl inside the Hyderabad jail, and Sindh government has suspended senior police and jail officials after a large number of cell phones, SIMs, and other equipment were recovered. And that's the news.com.pk by Amir Mir from December 18th, 2008. And here's from another article, quote, the real question that arises is how he has been able to acquire so much freedom to operate at will from within jail and engage in criminal activity that involved high-profile assassinations. It is also rumored that it is his links in high places that have enabled him so far to escape the gallows. And that's from the news.com.pk from December 19th, 2008, so a day after. So he was running a terrorist network from prison, and the last report about Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh that I'm aware of was a suicide attempt. And it says, quote, Omar Saeed Sheikh, the terrorist freed by India in exchange for the hostages of a hijacked plane in 2000, has attempted suicide in a Pakistani jail, an official said on Saturday. That was znews.india.com, February 16th, 2014. That's the last thing I know about him so far. But with regards to Danny Pearl, I have a quote from Mary Ann Pearl, who was Danny Pearl's wife, and she wrote a book called A Mighty Heart. And in that book, she says, quote, the distinctions between good and bad, government organizations and terrorist organizations are not simply fading, they seem to be faces of the same coin, end quote. So I just wanted to make people aware of that. Now, let's see. Do you have any, we went over a lot of stuff, but do you have any opinions of the 9/11 Commission?
Yeah. Just a couple of things that skipped over there. Let me go to that question.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to skip ahead, but we covered a lot
that's
of it.
okay. We're running out of time anyway. You know, and I think you've covered this in some of the presentations you've done publicly. Philip Zelikow is the Commission Executive Director. He's a fireman. He's like the fox in the hen house, you know, and he's basically got a wide range to steer what's going on. And obviously, the most you're going to get out of the Commission is a limited hangout, even if you could call it that much. It did its best, I think, to hide the involvement of Saudi Arabia and even more so Pakistan. When I went down to the subcommittee headed by, I forget what's her name now, the African-American woman who was for a long while in the House of Representatives. I addressed her subcommittee, and the 9/11 families were there.
Cynthia McKinney.
Yes,
that's right.
Yeah. And I agreed to do that on one condition, to go down there and tell them what I knew about Omar. I said, I want to know one thing, and I don't have to know any of the details, but I want to know whether or not there was a separate closed-door classified briefing for congressmen and senators who had their committees would have had jurisdiction or oversight of this. Was there a classified briefing, not in the 9/11 report, on Omar Saeed Sheikh? And they honored that agreement, and the answer was yes, there was. There's a whole level of a set of information that was given to a few senior leaders in our Congress that is not on Omar as a separate briefing that is not in the 9/11 report. Anyway,
also, the allegations concerning. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, the 9/11 Commission Philip Zelikow, as far as I'm concerned, belongs in jail for a number of reasons. Now, with regards to the 28 redacted pages of the Joint Congressional Inquiry, I always thought these allegations regarding the $100,000 wire transfer would be in those pages, but based on what Bob Graham has told me, it doesn't seem that they are. So I just wanted to point that out to people. There are a few things I wanted to tell people about. Okay, now this is an interesting story. There were actually bribery allegations with regards to Pakistan and the 9/11 Commission. Are you aware of this?
Not really, not the details.
Okay.
Not the details.
On March 3rd, 2006, the Friday Times reported that, quote, Pakistan gave tens of thousands of dollars through its lobbyists in the United States to members of the 9/11 Inquiry Commission to, quote, convince, end quote, them to stop some anti-Pakistan findings in the report, end quote. This, according to FO official Sadiq. According to the Pakistan paper Daily Times, this story about bribery, quote, triggered, end quote, U.S. media interest. I don't remember seeing any mention of this story at all. If you know of an American media outlet that investigated this story and reported on the results of that investigation, please let me know. On April 10th, 2006, the Dawn reports that Pakistan officially denied the allegations of bribery. Quote, Pakistan has never indulged in the illegal activity of bribing or buying influence anywhere in the world, end quote, said a statement issued by the FO spokesperson here on Sunday. Now, it's interesting to note that after Osama bin Laden's reported death on 5/1/2011, and after the United States started to hypocritically point fingers at Pakistan for either protecting or harboring Osama bin Laden, and I say hypocritically because we were protecting them. We were protecting the knowledge that they were connected to terrorism. Reuters reported that, quote, Pakistan's Washington lobbyists have launched an intense campaign on Capitol Hill to counter accusations that Islamabad was complicit in giving refuge to Osama bin Laden, end quote. Then an NBC Washington report on July 19th, 2011 comes out that says, quote, a Virginia man has been arrested for participating in a conspiracy to act as an agent of the Pakistani government. Court documents identify the man as Saeed Fai of Fairfax, Virginia, a U.S. resident. The FBI alleges that Fai funneled millions of dollars to elected officials in high-profile conferences in an effort to influence American policy on Kashmir, a disputed territory along the Indian and Pakistani border. In charging documents, Fai was said to have received funding for his lobbying efforts from the Pakistani ISI, the country's spy agency. So they denied the allegations concerning bribery in the 9/11 Commission, but then they say that they never do that kind of thing. And then we have two reports stating the exact opposite, that they do that kind of thing. So I wanted to make people aware of that. And one other thing was an odd confession from an arrested militant. And this is an entry from History Commons. June 22nd, 2007, arrested militant says Saeed Sheikh funded 9/11 hijackers. And it says, according to reports in the Indian press, a recently arrested militant leader says he believes Saeed Sheikh wired money to lead hijacker Muhammad Atta before 9/11. The militant, who is known as Babu Bhai and is a leader of the militant organization Harkat-ul-Jihad al-Islami, says that the money came from a ransom paid for the release of a kidnapped shoe company executive and that he was involved in the kidnap operation as a deputy to the local commander, Asif Raza Khan. Other people involved in the money transfer are arrested based on the information disclosed by Babu Bhai. This confession supports previous reports about the transfer, the wire transfer. So I thought that was odd that out of nowhere came this story of an arrested militant talking about this.
Yeah,
Did you ever hear of that?
It connects very nicely to all the other sources we have on that story,
Right.
that scenario.
Exactly. And so I've told people over the years that there is more reason to believe that this wire transfer did happen than not. And that has been my opinion. Do you agree?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's like I said, the Germans have their own informants. The FBI, got hold of the cell phone numbers and transcripts of that stuff, and you have a guy here involved in the kidnap of the shoe tycoon, and and we may find more too, but that certainly rises to the level of certainly a probable. When you get that many independent sources giving you the same story, it can't be dismissed.
Do you think one of the reasons that Danny Pearl was murdered was because of the fact that the Wall Street Journal was one of the only newspaper in the country to cover Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed? Do you think that had anything to do with that?
I've said so in the classroom constantly that maybe caught their attention. Like I said, so the paper itself was on their radar screen, and here comes Danny Pearl. Only he's looking into stuff that's even worse than what we've talked about today. He's actually looking at the weapons of mass destruction story, and catch him sneaking around in a very bad mosque. He shouldn't have been in there, the Benori Town mosque, and Omar is also tied into that too. It's a liaison with Bin Laden in Afghanistan. Okay, that's a big story that developed out of all the rest of the stuff we've been talking about on into November and December, and basically the CIA chief was hopping flights over there, every few weeks trying to wring the truth out of Musharraf and everybody else, all their nuclear scientists, about what had been going on. And so it's already enough to have the newspaper on their radar screen. Apparently, the only one that didn't cooperate, and it was basically a news blackout in the United States on this story. But to be fishing around for something even bigger, which is the export of Pakistan's nuclear technology, not just from comic on the top, but actual people who were bomb makers going in there and meeting with Bin Laden, was what Pearl was fishing around for. And so I think that's also part of why they killed him.
Well, Marianne Pearl writes in her book, I believe, if memory serves, that his being Jewish also had something to do with it.
Sure, I'm sure it did. But that's a story that nobody wanted to come out in Pakistan, that they were doing with Bin Laden and WMD.
Are you aware of that time during a press briefing with Condoleezza Rice where an Indian reporter asks her about Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed and the $100,000 wire transfer?
No.
Have you ever seen that?
No, I can't imagine that she was forthcoming.
Oh, okay. On March 15, 2002, Condoleezza Rice is asked a question about Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed. Dr. Rice, are you aware of the reports at the time that ISI chief was in Washington on September 11th? And he says falsely that on September 10th, $100,000 was wired from Pakistan to this group here in this area. It wasn't September 10th. It was in August, I believe. But anyway, he says, while he was here was he meeting with you or anybody in the administration? And her response was, I have not seen that report, and he was certainly not meeting with me. Now, if you read the transcript from the whitehouse.gov, where it says ISI chief, they take that out and replace it with a dash. They took out the ISI chief from that question in the transcript. I always thought that was funny.
Yeah. He basically is I think that lines up perfectly with the Los Angeles Times re-reporting the story based on the Indian press again in January, and telling everything except for the ISI chief's role.
Right. Is there anything you're working on now, or that you would like to promote, or anything at all?
Well, the latest, I just published a book on the Kennedy assassination that goes way back into '59 and before and a little bit after. It's called Where Angels Tread Lightly, the Assassination of President Kennedy, Volume 1. Any of your listeners are interested in the JFK case, I've started about a 5-volume or 6-volume series on that. And I am working on this subject that we're talking about today, too. Don't anticipate a manuscript being published until sometime next year, late next year.
I look forward to reading that. Are you aware of this study that came out from George Washington University with regards to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and so forth? That came out, I think it was in 2011. Are you aware of that document or report?
I don't know. I don't think so. Are you talking about the National Security Archives that you covered, or the school?
No, it was like the Danny Pearl Project or something to that effect. It was about Danny Pearl's murder. And I wrote to them and I asked them, why isn't there anything in here about Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh and the $100,000 wire transfer? And they said that they didn't see any evidence to support that. So that's why they didn't put it in this report. I could send you a link to that. But anyway, I want to thank you, John, very much for taking the time to come on my show to talk about this very important, what I think is an important issue that needs to be addressed and never has been. And I thank you very much for your insight. I think it's very invaluable, and I wish you luck with all of your future endeavors.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your time with me, too, and good luck with keeping the 9/11 story alive. I think that it needs people like you that are going to stay on it and keep digging until we get to the bottom of it.
Well, again, thank you for your time today, John, and I hope you have a great day.
You too.
All right, take care, John.